Mel and Jonah smiled as Darman and I spent the next few minutes talking about Mustangs until we realized we hadn't introduced the ladies to each other. "Excuse me, Darman, Mel, Colleen, this is Iona. Jonah, this is Darman, Mel, and Colleen. Damien is my new attorney." They shook hands. Mel hugged Jonah, and we hit the road. Have you ever wondered what could sound better than a big block V8 coming off the highway? Well, that's two big blocks heading in the same direction and having a great time. By the time we got to Phillip Island, I was smiling the full width of my face. Darman was a cocky racer, and his self-taught lawyer wanted to play, so we did. Jonah, for her part, was having a lot of fun too. We chatted along the way, belting out the lyrics to the song Black Betty remade by Spider Bait. Throughout the day, we had a great time with the penguins. We've all visited them before, but let's face it, penguins are cute whenever you see them. We had a great lunch of fish and chips sitting on the rocks, and it made me feel good to know that I had friends who had my back. It also surprised me that towards the end of the day, Jonah took my hand in hers. It felt natural, like it was meant to be. I must have blushed a few times when she looked at me. I was still married, and even though my wife was betraying me, I told myself I was still married, and fidelity meant a lot to me. About half an hour before we headed back, Colleen talked Jonah and Darman into walking with her to the penguins, and I could smell the setup as Mel and I walked behind them. "She likes you, you know," she said as we walked behind the other three. I nodded. "I know. I kind of like her too." But Mel put her hand on my arm as we walked. "I know, Thomas. She knows too. Jonah and I talked about it earlier. She was originally going to go to Queensland for a month before looking for her next job, but she said she wanted to wait so she could be there for the next month. She doesn't have a lot of savings, but she wants to be there for you." I think the surprise was reflected on my face, and at that moment, Iona turned around and smiled at me. She froze when she realized what we were talking about, then smiled even wider when I smiled back and returned her attention to Colleen. As we approached the penguins, Mel laughed. "See, the ride home was almost as much fun as the descent, only a little more subdued." At one point, I spotted a tavern up ahead on the way map and called Damien to tell him that Jonah and I would be stopping for a while. Mel struck up a conversation, telling us to have a good time, and Damien, Colleen, and Mel thanked us for coming and spending the day with them. I was surprised that the conversation with Jonah was light and casual during our return trip, and as we parked and walked to the tavern, it was an early summer evening. Dusk had been on for quite some time, and we took a seat by the window and perused the menu. We ordered drinks and food. I was going to indulge in a full portion of bourbon ribs, and Iona ordered the chicken parma. For those wondering, that's Parmigiana only scaled up with more cheese, chips, and gravy. I felt the mood turned serious for a moment. "Thomas," came the question. I looked at her. I had already mentioned some of the general physical traits of this woman who was now saving my life, but to elaborate, Iona was a native of Germany, and had been raised in that country until she was 4 years old and her parents immigrated to Australia. She was a born lover of numbers and is now in graduate school, interning in different parts of the country to see Australia before finding a place to settle down. Physically, Iona is quite small, at just 5 feet 2 inches. I can guess what you and Mel have been talking about. I know you're going through a difficult situation, and you need a friend more than anything. She took a hesitant breath. That's what I want to be for you right now, a friend first and foremost. She paused for a moment and looked away, still holding my hands. But we've known each other for a while now, and over the last couple of weeks, as we've gotten closer, I've realized it could be more than that. I know I like you more than a friend. Do you know what I'm talking about? I smiled. I was touched. This woman was letting me know that she was interested in more than just friendship. Even knowing that there was nothing wrong with my head, Iona, I started to say, but stopped myself. Her face lowered, more like, crushed, when I stopped. I think she thought it was a rejection. I squeezed her hands. Iona, you're an amazing woman, and you're right. I need friends first and foremost right now, but to be honest with you, in the confusion I'm feeling right now, I kind of like you too. I left the rest of this without comment. More often than not, we go from happiness to despair in an instant, and it's much easier to make your world crumble from under your feet than it is to climb up the mountain to the sunlight. But Jonah managed it. One moment I saw her thinking about rejection, the next moment, there was an expression of serene joy on her face. Her smile was up to her ears, and her big blue eyes looked at me with adoration. We spent the rest of the evening talking about likes and dislikes. We talked about movies, music, and of course Mustangs. I told her the story of losing my parents and grandparents, and her eyes widened when I confided in her about my trust fund. So, why are you working at Simon & Sachs? She asked shortly after my story. I shrugged. I had originally planned to work there for a couple of years just for the experience, I explained. I thought about working there for a while, like you did, to see different things. I talked to my dad about starting an investment company in a few years, but when they died, I just stayed there. The mention of my parents' deaths in relation to my trust sobered us up a bit. Sorry, Thomas, she said. When I look at you, I don't see some rich, spoiled guy. I see a man who is focused but has no tolerance for fools, even if he has his own humility, she lectured me. I snorted. Thanks. I'm serious. You're a good man, she continued. You haven't lost your temper yet, and you haven't gone and killed them yet, referring to my wife and her lovers. No, not like they're going to do to me, I replied dejectedly, without thinking. Her widening eyes made me realize what I'd said, and I proceeded to retell Jonah the high-level conversation my private investigator had picked up on, that they were all planning on blowing me off in a few years to get some of the money after I became the father of Candice's baby. Iona was shocked, and by the end of the conversation, she was crying. You're doing something about this, aren't you? I'm not a lawyer, but this has to be a crime, she almost whispered, her finger squeezing my hand. She was worried, and I almost thought she was going to start looking for the killers. I nodded. Damien is on the case. It'll all happen at the end of next week, I let her go. I'm sorry, but Thomas, your wife is plotting to kill you, she said, with an almost hysterical note in her voice. We talked for a few more minutes, and as we walked back to my car, she held my hand, looking around almost constantly. It's okay, Iona, I said, holding her hand in mine. I doubt anyone is watching us, but if they are, I have a fast car, and we can outrun them. That made her laugh, and the rest of the way home, our conversation was much more subdued. When I dropped her off, Iona hugged me tightly, and in a moment of weakness, I kissed her chastely on the lips. We both blushed and smiled, realizing what we had just done and realizing that there would be more to our relationship if we allowed it. As we drove away, I smiled. On the way to the new bed and breakfast I was staying at, I sang along to the radio and felt the ache in my heart begin to subside, thanks to Damien, Mel, and Colleen, but mostly thanks to Jonah. I was already a couple of streets away from home when the phone rang. It was Candice. I could hear her at the bar. Baby, she said, with a note of concern in her voice, where are you? I've been trying to reach you all day. Damn, I thought. I haven't returned her call. Sorry, Candice, but I went to Phillip Island today with some friends and their daughter to see the penguins. It was last minute, and I got a little distracted. I felt the tension in her voice ease. Oh, Okay. I was a little worried. Did you have a good day? She asked. Now that the issue of my lack of communication was resolved, it was a great day. Seeing the penguins with the kids was amazing, I said, letting the genuine sense of joy I felt watching Colleen with the penguins flow through our conversation. They make you look at the happiness you experience in a different way. I wasn't lying, watching Colleen with the penguins was hilarious. She loved feeding them the bait fish we bought, and at one point, made us all laugh when a group of penguins followed her around looking for more food. You know, maybe we can start trying for a baby of our own when I get back. You're giving me nothing but trouble, I thought. Have a baby so you can poison me later. See you later, Candice. How's the conference going? Did you go? I asked, changing the subject. Oh yeah, the conference went great. We really did a lot of studying, she said, not realizing that I had picked up on the hint she was using. And yes, a group of us, including my boss, are going out for a few drinks. Don't worry, my boss is keeping an eye on me to make sure no outsiders trespass on my virtue. You bet, I thought, as if this had any virtue at all. After that, I lost interest in the conversation and let her talk to me for a few minutes about. Well, I have no idea what she was talking about. I wasn't listening anymore. She hung up with the words "I love you," but I don't know if she noticed that I never reciprocated. For the next week, I came to work early every day to get all the work done in time. Given what was coming up, I didn't want to leave any of my clients without work. I was sure that both Mary and William were up to something with George and Candice, but I didn't know what. And as the week went on, I noticed that they were looking at me less and less often. As I turned up my nose, I moved to another hotel. Why? Well, against all odds, I was paranoid before I found out about the plot to end my life. After that, I was just as freaked out by the whole situation as Jonah was. So I switched locations every other day. I spent most evenings that week with Jonah. We would have dinner, and she would help me pack up all of mine and Candice's things in my apartment. My stuff was going to the storage shed of the company I had invested in years ago, and for free. Candice's stuff was being moved out and placed elsewhere, with payment for 60 days, giving her a couple of months to sort out her upcoming affairs. I talked to Candice every day and got Norm's reports. One night, as we were packing up the kitchen, I mistakenly showed Jonah a couple of pictures from the report, and she immediately ran to the bathroom and threw up. When she came back, she was furious and kept hugging me, berating my soon-to-be ex-wife for her behavior. Monday morning came. It was game day. The cheaters were due back early in the morning, and I was going to be away for a month in Kieran's in North Queensland. I went to work that morning like a normal day. I attended a staff meeting where William informed us that George would be back tomorrow for the first time since I had been inducted. I noticed Mary looking at me while William was telling us this. I made a note to pass this on to Damien for conspiracy charges if they were involved in anything. Shortly before lunch, one of the group asked me if I wanted to have lunch with them, and I politely declined. However, when they left, I started an hour on my laptop and walked out, leaving my keys and cards on my desk. I wanted to leave a letter of resignation, but Damien's team was supposed to deliver it this afternoon. As I was leaving the office, the driver of the company car opened the door, greeting me. We drove to the airport, and he informed me that our plane would be on time. While Iona hugged me, giving me another of those chaste kisses I had grown to love, when we got to the airport, Damien and Mel were there to see us off. I handed my phone to the lawyer, and he, in turn, handed me a new phone with a new number on it. Only a few people knew this number, and it would remain that way for some time to come. Iona and I flew business class to Kieran's, enjoying champagne as soon as we reached cruising level. I knew that Candice, as well as the other rogues, would be arriving home around this time. As we disembarked from the plane, we were met by another driver who took Jonah and me to the nice bed and breakfast we had booked for the first week of our stay. I'm partial to B&Bs, and I have to say, this one was lovely. It was run by an elderly gay couple who had been together for 40 years. They built this split-level house when prices were cheap, and they had a house full of foster children. Now they ran a bed and breakfast for entertainment and company. They gave us a full breakfast in the morning with bacon, eggs, tomatoes, toast, beans, and spinach. The coffee was not as good as at home, from a pod, but acceptable. But the view. The house had a gorgeous view of the water at sunset. We loved watching the play of colors in the little cove as the waves gently lapped the walkway leading across the street to the esplanade. Jonah and I had a large double bed in our own attached bathroom with a double shower and whirlpool tub. The owners told us that they had remodeled a few years ago, and now have 2 king bedrooms and 4 superior rooms. The king bedrooms were luxurious and cost a little more, but I knew it was worth it. On the way from the airport to the hotel, I turned on my phone and got a single text from Damien, "It's done." Chaos ensued, but you're a free man now. Turn off your phone, and I'll talk to you in a few days. I did as told, and that night, after registering for the first time, I got nervous. Jonah and I knew we were going to end up in the same bed, and I think we were worried because of our expectations of each other. Neither of us needed to worry. We went to the bedroom, and after that, we all fell asleep. "Good morning, how are you feeling?" she asked, noticing that I was awake. "Awesome. Last night was. Wow, seriously, Jonah, it was incredible," she squealed in praise. "So it worked," she nodded approvingly. "What worked?" I asked, perplexed. "You forgot about the and, you claimed me as yours, and now I'm yours, Thomas. As long as you have me, my heart and soul are yours." We dressed and went to breakfast, walking slowly at first while Jonah got used to the slight soreness. Our hosts wished us good morning and gave us knowing looks. The next few days were amazing. Jonah and I enjoyed the cuisine, we visited the amazing Daintree rainforest, and even took a steam train and cable car ride. We snorkeled on a large barrier reef. By the end of the first week, I had forgotten my cell phone. It wasn't until Damien and Mel showed up with Colleen that I remembered it. We had agreed beforehand that for the second week, they would stay in the same place as us. Damien grinned and said that was fine. That night at dinner, he had a story to tell. "Well, the scraps must have hit the rotating device," he said when Colleen went to her room to watch a movie so the adults could talk. He leaned in. "A total of 9 people have been arrested in the last week on charges of conspiracy to commit murder." "What?" Jonah and I said at the same time. Damien grinned. "Yes," he said, and a loyally grin spread across his face. "From the statements we've been able to get on your behalf and the interviews we've gotten from the police over the last week, 5 of the people you know, including your former boss and your soon-to-be ex-wife, the office manager at your former place of employment, the other owner, and 2 others at Candice's work, have been involved." I leaned back in my chair and exhaled. 9 people wanted me dead. I asked, sort of. Damien said they all admitted to having nothing specific against you. Indeed, according to them, you were a very nice guy. But they had an agreement that each of them would receive at least a couple $1 million from your trust a few years after your death. Of course, they all blamed each other. Well, except Candice. She broke down when she came home and found you gone, and the pictures and divorce papers say so. She is now being held in a secure wing of the local Ramsey Hospital for observation. I delivered your resignation letter and noticed that you are personally suing your former place of employment, he told me, smiling at the memory. Now they're closed for business, and all employees are terminated immediately. Of course, no one thinks they'll survive. It's a similar situation at Candice's workplace. Oh, and I was also present when the notices were served and watched the arrest of Mr. Randwick Johnston. I have to say, it was very satisfying from a professional standpoint. I wasn't charged for it, he winked at me, and I laughed. What about Roger? I asked if he got arrested too. His wife thought he was traveling for work, not having fun with one of his friends' wives. I called her and asked if we could represent her pro bono. It seemed like the least I could do. Mel slapped Damon's face. Kid, stop teasing. We all laughed and spent the next hour prying for details. At one point, Mel looked at Jonah and me holding hands and commented, "Well, that didn't take you too very long, did it?" She stated. Iona just looked at me and blushed, then at Damon, and then Mel laughed. I made him take me in his arms the first night, she told the couple in front of us, then I made sure he never left the room. I don't think he had 1 free minute to think about those idiots. Besides, I think he likes it when I walk funny. The next day Damien exhaled his coffee through his nose, and Mel laughed. I, on the other hand, just smiled like the Cheshire Cat. Mel looked at me. I think you'll be fine, Thomas, she said, looking between Jonah and me. And this one I know is a keeper. They stayed with us for the next week, and we enjoyed day trips around the world, overnight stays at casinos, and even a light airplane flight to the Dangri coast. At the end of the week, they headed home to Melbourne, and we boarded a plane to Brisbane. In Brisbane, Iona introduced me to her parents as her boyfriend, and I happily played the part. Back in a major metropolitan city, we were on the news one night where they were talking about a plot to destroy the future. My name wasn't mentioned, but when Jonah told my parents, they almost panicked until we told them the story. More honest and trustworthy people I had never met. As we went through our journey with them, we spent another week sightseeing in Brisbane and then another week in Sydney. By the time a month had passed, neither Jonah nor I could imagine ourselves without each other. Toward the end of the trip, we started talking about marriage and children. I told her that once I was divorced, we would get engaged. It wasn't a traditional proposal, but she loved me anyway, knowing that when the time came, I would get down on one knee in front of her. When the subject of children came up, she blushed. Thomas, I have a confession to make, she said. I might be pregnant, she said shyly, trying to gauge my reaction. She sighed. I'm supposed to get my period in a few days, and then we'll all know. She looked at me hopefully again. Are you crazy? I snorted. No, I've thought about it a few times, I admitted honestly. I was hoping we'd accidentally get pregnant for the past month. I can't think of anyone I'd rather have a baby with than you. Unfortunately, she woke up in the morning with her period. I kissed her with an unhappy look and told her, maybe next month. In the meantime, we need to practice a lot. Eventually, we finished our vacation and headed back to Melbourne. We stayed overnight at Iona's house. She managed to persuade the landlord to keep her apartment for a few more months instead of going north. It was a small apartment, a half-hour outside of town. After staying at all the bed and breakfasts around the country for the past month, Iona was a little embarrassed about her accommodations. I shooed her away and spent the next half-hour walking around the apartment, asking the most inane questions about everything in the world. By the end of it, she was already giggling and coming up with ostentatious answers. The next day, we went to Damon's office. Jonah and I worked there, looking at new places to live. During lunch, Mel brought us both coffee. Mel, what are you doing here? Iona asked. A little birdie told me you were here, so I thought I'd come by to see how you were doing and bring you some coffee, freshly made of course. She set them on the table and took a sip of her coffee. When Iona sighed, What's wrong? Mel asked, catching the concern in her sigh. Iona shrugged her shoulders. It's not all that good, Mel. He hasn't knocked me up yet. A few moments later, Mel was already splashing coffee on the conference room table. Excuse me, I laughed, Jonah and I are going to try to have a baby. After the past month, we just decided to see what happens. That's quick, Mel said, perhaps a little concerned. We both nodded to our friend. Maybe, Iona said dismissively, there's no one in this world I'd rather have a baby with, she said, looking at me adoringly. Mel looked between us, studying us with her gaze, and suddenly shrugged. Then she asked what we were doing at the office. As soon as she found out we were looking for a house, she immediately agreed. She spent the next couple working with us, helping us determine our wants and needs, where we would live, and what we might need if we were going to have a baby. At one point, Darman stopped by on his way to court and smiled at me as he heard the two women talking in the kitchen. Over the next month, we looked at several places and eventually settled on 3 apartments in a house. Iona relented, saying it was my money, and she would be happy to have me by her side. I replied that it would be our place, and we would choose it together. We ended up choosing a penthouse apartment in a slightly older building at the bottom of Collins Street. It was fairly easy to get to major highways from here, public transportation was fast, and like everywhere else in Melbourne, it was a short walk to any food. The apartment itself was gorgeous. It had 3 modest bedrooms and a large master bedroom. It had a great view of Melbourne Park, where the tennis matches and the Australian Open were held. The building had a pool, sauna, gym, and a 24-hour concierge. We had 2 garage spaces, and I was able to park my Mustang and the new Jeep that I only just bought. All in all, it was like an enlarged hotel that we could call home. There wasn't much furniture in the house, but it was worth spending an afternoon with Mel, and everything changed. Within a month, we had moved in, which was a good thing since Jonah's period never came that month. Now it's been almost 9 months since it started. Jonah is now 6 months old, and we have our baby boy. We've settled into the apartment, and it seems like every surface has soft baby proofing on it. We've turned one of the rooms into a nursery, another into a bedroom for guests, and a third into an office for work. As for work, Jonah and I have started a new investment business. At the moment, we only have a couple million, as I'm still a couple of years away from getting a trust, but Iona is good with numbers, and she has a good head on her shoulders. She owns 10% of the stock in the new venture. She said she didn't want anything, but I managed to convince Mel. To be honest, that's the only fight we've had so far. I now own 70%. We have an investor with 15%, and the last 5% is owned by Damien and Mel. They have become very close friends, and it never ceases to amaze me the difference between Damien the lawyer and Damien the friend. As a lawyer on my side, he was such a force that you had to get out of his way or be destroyed. He managed to get judgments against Candace in my former places of employment. Both companies were now in administration, but they had a lot of liquid assets when everything happened. So he said both Jonah and I would receive substantial amounts in checks. He also secured a win for Roger's wife, where almost all of the assets went to her, as he was now in prison for the next 30 years, as were almost everyone else involved in the plot to kill me. I received one message from William and George asking for mercy, which I immediately tore up in front of Damien when he showed me the pearly whites, and finally, he took great pleasure in cutting my former lawyer to pieces on the stand during the trial. I hadn't mentioned Candace too much so far, but not because she was getting away with it. In fact, she got 35 years without parole. The only people in court who sympathized with her when her sentence was announced were her parents. However, after learning what she had done and what she planned to do, I don't think their support was much. Even then the judge immediately granted a divorce based on the offenses against me. He noted his disgust at their behavior and the fact that they had ruined so many lives. According to the prenuptial agreement, Candace left with her belongings and $155,000 to start her life over. I put that money in a trust fund with a percentage of the income she would receive upon her release from prison. Due to her mental illness, she did not attend the court hearing. She was still in the secure psychiatric unit, and was to be transferred to the medical unit of a medium-security prison within a month of sentencing. Her only request was that I come to visit her once she was settled. I agreed, citing that it would not interfere with the divorce. 6 weeks later, I was sitting in a secure meeting room in the medical wing of the prison where Candace was being held. The room was simple, a bolted table, chairs with chains, one of those one-way mirrors they always show in movies. I'd been sitting there for about 10 minutes when the doctor and the guard brought my ex-wife in. She looked like 6 kinds of hell, her normally straight brown hair was loose all over. It looked like she had tried to comb it in some places but not others. Next were the eyes, they were shifting to the sides as if she was looking for something. It didn't look like she was threatened by anything, but it looked like she was looking for a threat. When she saw me, it was as if she focused, and an eerie calm came over her. The doctor frowned but retreated to a corner. The third and most obvious thing was that my ex-wife was very, very pregnant. I looked at her belly as she sat up, and Candace smiled. "I'm actually almost a week late, Thomas," she told me, running her hands over her swollen belly. "They told me that if I don't go into labor within 24 hours, they're going to have to induce labor for me. Is that normal, Thomas?" "Our baby, Candace." I caught the doctor's wave and stopped it. "It's okay, Candace," I told her. "Have them paid you so you can have the baby." She seemed to relax. "Thomas? I want you to know that I never wanted to see you dead. I didn't care about your money, but they all convinced me," Candace told me sadly. "They told me that after we had the baby it would be the right time. I didn't want to do anything to you, but they said that if I didn't do it they would do it anyway, but it would be much more cruel and I would be left with nothing. Thomas, my love, you have to believe me." She stopped and waited. I looked at the doctor and he shrugged. "Candace," I started to say. "It's okay, Thomas," she said, interrupting me, and smiled sadly, looking into my eyes for a moment before looking away again. "I know we're divorced, I realize that, but when our baby is born I'm sure they'll let me out and I'll make things right. All those things I did, honey, they meant nothing to me. You should know that I love only you. When Roger took me the first time I felt so guilty," Candace said in a whisper as if it were a secret, "but when George found out and then my job them Randy." "Thomas," she raised her pleading eyes to me again, "can you forgive me?" I paused. "Candace," she started again, interrupting me, "it's okay, Thomas, our baby will help you forgive me. We have this baby and I will come out, then we can be a family. I promise I won't let them kill you again." She began to ramble incoherently. "I love you, Thomas, you're my number one boyfriend. All of them are number two. I mean, they were good, but they were just as interested in each other as they were in me. I think they only had fun with me for the money. Thomas, it's just going to be you and me here, and of course our baby for the next 15 minutes. She rambled on about our baby, about us being together again, about her coming out and us being a family. At one point she stopped and the doctor and I looked at each other and then we heard a sob. "I know I screwed up, Thomas," she said quietly, a note of sanity and reservation in her voice that hadn't been there before. "I know this baby isn't yours and you and I will never." She shuddered with sobs. "The drugs they give me calm me down, make me think it's possible, but in between their effects and when they're weathered I have moments where I remember what I was." She looked at me, tears streaming down her face. Her eyes reflected the pain in her eyes. "I betrayed everyone. I became out of greed when you offered me all of this anyway. I betrayed you often and then I was going to poison you. I'm a low dirty who deserves revenge." She was beginning to worry. "I know, we want you to know that I never wanted to see you dead. I didn't care about your money, but they all convinced me," Candace told me sadly. "They told me that after we had the baby, it would be the right time. I didn't want to do anything to you, but they said that if I didn't do it, they would do it anyway, but it would be much more cruel, and I would be left with nothing. Thomas, my love, you have to believe me." She stopped and waited. I looked at the doctor, and he shrugged. Candice, I started to say. It's okay, Thomas, she said, interrupting me, and smiled sadly, looking into my eyes for a moment before looking away again. I know we're divorced, I realize that, but when our baby is born, I'm sure they'll let me out, and I'll make things right. All those things I did, honey, they meant nothing to me. You should know that I love only you. When Roger took me the first time, I felt so guilty, Candice said in a whisper, as if it were a secret. But when George found out and then my job, then Randy, Thomas, she raised her pleading eyes to me again. Can you forgive me? I paused. Candice, she started again, interrupting me. It's okay, Thomas. Our baby will help you forgive me. We have this baby, and I will come out. Then we can be a family? I promise I won't let them kill you again, she began to ramble incoherently. I love you, Thomas. You're my number one boyfriend. All of them are number two. I mean, they were good, but they were just as interested in each other as they were in me. I think they only had fun with me for the money. Thomas, it's just going to be you and me here, and of course, our baby. For the next 15 minutes, she rambled on about our baby, about us being together again, about her coming out, and us being a family. At one point, she stopped, and the doctor and I looked at each other, and then we heard a sob. I know I screwed up, Thomas, she said quietly, a note of sanity and reservation in her voice that hadn't been there before. I know this baby isn't yours, and you and I will never, she shuddered with sobs. The drugs they give me calm me down, make me think it's possible, but in between their effects and when they're weathered, I have moments where I remember what I was. She looked at me, tears streaming down her face. I betrayed everyone. I became out of greed when you offered me all of this. Anyway, I betrayed you often, and then I was going to poison you. I'm a low, dirty who deserves revenge, she was beginning to worry. I knew you hate me, Thomas, and I am cursed for still loving you as much as the day I betrayed you. She stood up, and in one motion, pulled off her prison top and maternity bra, leaving her topless. The doctor tried to cautiously approach her. Candice grabbed her stomach. Get back at Thomas, she growled, addressing herself rather than me. Hit me and make me cry. Hurt me and make me feel the pain you feel. This baby is not yours. I gave this body away when it didn't belong to me. She collapsed to the ground and sobbed. I didn't know what to do and just sat next to her. It was supposed to be yours, Thomas. It was supposed to, she repeated, sitting on the ground slowly. Candice looked at me and then at the doctor. The doctor, sensing that things were coming to an end, gently turned to my ex-wife. I think it's time for us to eat dinner and for you to take your next round of medication, don't you, Candice? The doctor helped her into her outer garments, and as she knocked on the door and the guard outside took her away, Candice took one last look at me, a sad smile on her face. Live well, Thomas, and with that, she left. A week later, I got a call from her doctor, thanking me for seeing her. He told me that everything had gone better than he expected, and Candice had given birth to a baby girl. The baby was healthy, and DNA testing was now being done on the father. Candice advised them to put the baby up for adoption so that the girl would grow up in a loving family rather than going through the foster care system in hopes of one day being close to her, which she knew would not happen. That night, after meeting Candice, I was all out of breath until Jonah laid my head on her stomach, and I felt our son kicking. 2 months later, John Thomas, the other, was born. I thought of the innocent little girl, and in a moment of weakness, "You hate me, Thomas, and I am cursed for still loving you as much as the day I betrayed you." She stood up and in one motion pulled off her prison top and maternity bra, leaving her topless. The doctor tried to cautiously approach her. Candice grabbed her stomach. "Get back at Thomas," she growled, addressing herself rather than me. "Hit me and make me cry, hurt me and make me feel the pain you feel. This baby is not yours. I gave this body away when it didn't belong to me." She collapsed to the ground and sobbed. I didn't know what to do and just sat next to her. "It was supposed to be yours, Thomas. It was supposed to," she repeated, sitting on the ground slowly. Candice looked at me and then at the doctor. The doctor, sensing that things were coming to an end, gently turned to my ex-wife. "I think it's time for us to eat dinner and for you to take your next round of medication, don't you, Candice?" The doctor helped her into her outer garments, and as she knocked on the door and the guard outside took her away, Candice took one last look at me, a sad smile on her face. "Live well, Thomas," and with that she left. A week later I got a call from her doctor thanking me for seeing her. She told me that everything had gone better than he expected and Candice had given birth to a baby girl. The baby was healthy and DNA testing was now being done on the father. Candice advised them to put the baby up for adoption so that the girl would grow up in a loving family rather than going through the foster care system, in hopes of one day being close to her, which she knew would not happen. That night after meeting Candice I was all out of breath until Jonah laid my head on her stomach and I felt our son kicking. 2 months later John Thomas the other was born. I thought of the innocent little girl and in a moment of weakness I asked Damien to contact the adoption agency and inquire about the possibility of adopting baby Candice. 2 more months passed, and little Macy Candice Drew moved in with us. We learned that she was Rye's child, and Damien happily sued the disgraced attorney for child support. In the end, a paltry sum was allocated to her university fund. Of course, she would never need them, but it was a basic sum. Jonah, for her part, never treated Candice's daughter any differently than she treated her own children. We both believed that a child should not suffer the sins of their biological parents. Jonah and I married a year later when the kids were walking. And then, on our honeymoon, we gave them a baby sister. A year and a half later, a baby brother came along. And then Iona convinced me to have surgery. When Macy turned 18, we told her the truth about her origins, about our history with her birth parents, and that no matter what, we loved her. There were turbulent emotions in the apartment that week, and only talking to Aunt Mel calmed her down and made her realize that Jonah and I would always be her parents. Anyway, we made an appointment for her to meet Randy and Candice. Randy didn't care at all, but he insulted her as a mistake that shouldn't have been born. Then he tried to insult her as a tainted product. That landed him in jail. This caused 2 guards to pull me away from my former attorney, put him in the infirmary for a week, and robbed him of 3 of his teeth. Macy never saw him again. Candice's journey was a starkly different tale. After years of recovery, she had progressed enough to be transferred to the general ward. Though still delicate, doctors assured us that fellow inmates looked out for her, keeping her from undue trouble. Upon seeing Macy with Jonah and me, Candice's realization overwhelmed her. She collapsed in tears in the visitors' lounge, seeking solace behind her trembling hands. Macy, ever gracious, approached and offered her support, guiding her to the table. Jonah and I stood witness as Macy, extending her hand, introduced herself as Macy Candice Other, revealing her status as Candice's biological daughter. Candice's tears flowed anew. Though guards monitored closely, we had forewarned them, and the warden permitted brief embraces following a thorough search. Even I couldn't remain untouched by the sight of my adopted daughter and ex-wife before me. Jonah, gazing up at me, brushed away a tear, blaming it on pollen. Moments later, my wife drew me towards my ex-wife, and we spent the next hour conversing. Candice expressed gratitude for my adoption of Macy, admitting she knew nothing of Macy's fate after relinquishing her and wasn't even aware of her name. Adopting her daughter catalyzed positive change in Candice. Doctors noted a marked improvement in her behavior thereafter. Though she still had some time left on her sentence, the prison reported her transformation into a model prisoner following the encounter. As for Macy, she dutifully visited Candice on birthdays and holidays, at the behest of her mother and Aunt Mel. Though their bond remained distant, Macy made the effort to connect. Personally, I reluctantly assented, already beginning to forgive Candice. Yet, we both acknowledged that friendship was out of reach. To Jonah and me, she remained the woman who once challenged my complacency, fiercely guarding me and issuing warnings in German to any who dared encroach. Thanks for tuning in, I hope you found it engaging. Don't forget to subscribe for more content.